You know, this year's Monaco Grand Prix reinforced my belief that in our sport there are fans and then there are spectators. The fans of the sport will see the mind games, the management and the discipline as the true battle on track at Monaco, and the spectators will just see the numbers aren't going up or down as a damning indictment of the historic jewel in the crown. As much as we would love to see the cars get smaller and the opportunity for more overtaking threats to be granted, there is already plenty to love about racing at the Principality as it is. I guess in life there will be those that prefer the quick release of Michael Bay's Transformers rather than the more subtle brilliance of The Godfather. However, just because the on-track action didn't please everyone, that doesn't mean that there isn't still plenty of talking points to take away from the Monaco Grand Prix, with there now being questions about the long-term futures of a quarter of the grid, with some of those now potentially being poised to not even make it to the end of the season, and one of those would be lucky to even have another race in Formula 1, given there is a crash-happy dolt, another crash-happy dolt, a driver so crash-happy that one could consider him a dolt, and a driver who might be a bit unfortunate to lose his seat after a short stay in F1, there is certainly a lot of thinking for teams to do over the break before the Canadian Grand Prix in 2 weeks' time, as well as a lot of partying for Charles Leclerc and Ferrari, who have shortened the gap to Red Bull by a substantial amount on a rather tragic weekend for the Austrian team. Want to know how the event at Monaco unfolded? We really enjoyed this year's edition, and we know it may not be to everyone's taste, but it provided more than enough to talk about during the upcoming break. And stick around, because there could be as many as 4 drivers who deserve to be on the chopping block, but just how many could see their career crash and burn? So just how did the race in Monaco unfold? Well, for the first time in what feels like a while, we saw a substantial series of first lap incidents that pulled out the red flag and stopped proceedings. Not only was there the huge collision up Beau Rivage, there was also the collision of the Alpine teammates Dan and Portier, all of which seems like they could have implications far beyond the race, but we'll get back to that later. The luckiest man on track also seemed to be the most dissatisfied at the checkered flag, with Carlos Sainz being gifted an opportunity to start fresh after pulling up at the top of Beau Rivage following an instant of his own with Oscar Piastri. The rest of the race following a clean restart would result in mind games and race management, in which we saw Leclerc maintain the balance between himself and the Sunday driving George Russell, something which he made clear to be an uncomfortable experience as he walked the tightrope between tyre management, managing the pit stop gap between the top 5, and maintaining focus on bringing the car home safely. The tension as the gaps between the top 4 increased and decreased was palpable, with the threat of a dive bomb into the Nouvelle chicane being an ever-present across the 78 laps. Further back, Max Verstappen was caught in a Merc sandwich between Russell and Hamilton, with the latter triggering pit stops which the team failed to capitalize on, and the former being put in a precarious defensive situation, which on any other track would have likely cost him his position. Further back, Alonso took a page out of Kevin Magnussen's book by backing up the pack to afford his teammate an advantage, just for Stroll to throw it away by requiring another pit stop, with an instant that, had it happened further away from the pits or just after the pits, could have really caused some late drama in the race. Speaking of drama, Monaco has opened up a whole can of worms for some drivers, with it putting those already in danger in an even more precarious position and making it clear that one driver isn't quite as secure as we thought he was. To get the first one out of the way, Stroll isn't losing his seat, but surely Fernando must be sick of racing for a team where they constantly have a handicap against them in the form of their number 2 driver. After being gifted with the opportunity to push forward or position himself to properly capitalize on any mistakes in front of him, Stroll drops it and ends up finishing behind his teammate anyway. With Felipe Drugovich in the wings, a winner of the F2 Championship and a pretty tidy racer with at the very least the hunger to develop further, Lance is posing more and more of a threat to the public image of the team, while making it clear that the seat would be better utilized by pretty much anyone else on offer at the moment. I mean, hey, Mika Hakkinen is still technically just on hiatus, right? The next obvious one is Kevin Magnussen, who is just getting more and more frustrating as the season goes on. In half of the races now, K-Mag has compromised at least one person's race with incidents, mistakes, or mind-numbing gamemanship, and it seems that it has finally reached a breaking point, having ruined his teammate's race at the Principality. Nico Hülkenberg made his thoughts on the incident pretty clear, pretty much as soon as it happened, saying it was unnecessary and stupid. At this point, Magnussen has pissed off as many people as Nikita Mazepin had through throughout his short stint in F1, and the only reason we can see Magnussen being kept is for financial reasons or the reluctance to find another experienced driver to field next to Hülkenberg's replacement when he departs for Audi at the end of the season. For us, Oliver Behrman would have to do something pretty extreme to not end up in that Haas seat following his heroics earlier on in the season, so he is pretty much a given. But Magnussen's incompetence, incapability and inability to not sow chaos has given Haas a lot more to think about than necessary. For the time being, Magnussen should count himself lucky that there isn't a more obvious viable appointment for the seat, as if a second new signing becomes available for Haas, then we wouldn't be surprised if he was one more instant away from being prematurely replaced as well as facing a race ban, one which Perez, along with most other people with a functioning brain, was surprised he didn't receive following the huge lap 1 calamity. Speaking of Oliver Behrman, if Haas does find a way to get him in the car before the end of the season, then Prema could end up without any of their current drivers, as yet another lackluster weekend from Logan Sargent has made the prospect of Andrea Kimi Antonelli to come in as a mid-season replacement even more enticing. The drive was so milquetoast that it's even hard to point out individual elements, as the overall performance was just so bland, which becomes fairly abhorrent given his teammates' securing of 9th position. Sargent has the capabilities to be a decent driver and has only had 30 races so far in his short career, but in a team with clear upward intentions and a sport where talent constantly becomes available, it might be that it's only a matter of time before he departs, whether at the end of the season with the rumoured introduction of Carlos Sainz, or mid-season at Zandvoort, with Antonelli's 18th birthday making him viable for a super license. The last, and possibly most shocking, is the aforementioned Esteban Ocon. Following an unnecessary and embarrassing incident with his teammate, Ocon was rendered unable to continue the race and had to take the long walk back to the Alpine trackside HQ, the place that it looked like he may land when his car eventually hit the ground again. Following the race, teammate Pierre Gasly made his disappointment clear and said that the team had a pre-race agreement that wasn't held up by Ocon. Gasly's disappointment was clear as he said this after the race. "I'm just disappointed with Esteban because it shouldn't have happened, and for the team, we can't afford to have this sort of behavior. We had clear instructions before the race and this hasn't been respected, and you should never take that much of a risk to take out both cars with your teammates. I'm sure it will be discussed and we can't afford to have a similar situation in the future." Talking to Canal Plus, Bruno Famin dropped this bombshell, saying that Esteban's future now hangs in the balance. "It's sad to see this kind of incident. It's exactly what we didn't want to see. Esteban's attack was totally out of circumstances. It was exactly what we don't want to see, and we're going to draw the consequences. We're going to make a tough decision. If we were fighting for a podium finish at the end of the race, why not? And still. But there on the first lap at Le Portier, frankly, it wasn't the place to be making an attack, leaving zero room for his teammate." Famin was then seen talking to reserve driver Jack Doohan. However, the contents of this discussion is yet to be known, but the prospect of Ocon being dropped mid-season has very suddenly become a reality, in perhaps the biggest shock twist in the driver market since Hamilton being announced as a Ferrari driver. Ocon's seat could become open at a time where the team is at its lowest and at a time where it has the least to lose by filling the seat with another driver. What's more is that a new entrant to the team is far more likely to respect the boundaries set by the team, as Ocon has a history of teammate collisions as far back as his Racing Point days. So who could the hopefuls be? Well, as mentioned, Jack Doohan is the current reserve driver for the team, and with Victor Martin still early in his development and struggling so far this F2 season, he seems the most sensible internal choice for Alpine. However, rumours that started to circulate last week indicated that Mick Schumacher had massively impressed Alpine during his time in their World Endurance cars. Bruno Famin has been particularly outspoken about Mick, praising his speed and capabilities at the wheel, but this in particular is something which seems to be in direct contrast with the current problem posed by Esteban Ocon, as Bruno Famin gave a glowing report on the German's mentality and team spirit. Mick is making an incredible job in endurance. What